We have made it to week 3 of learning mathematics. Congratulations! This is a huge deal. So we are looking at page 10. So you should have page 10 out in front of you, this page with this snoozy little panda here. It is called a task. So again, this is one of those like the extreme temperatures last Friday and different things like that where you, I'm going to read through some things for you, and then you're going to pause me and make me wait while you try to answer some of these questions. So let me show you what is given to you here. It's called the sleep survey. It says this: Mr. Names gave his students an assignment to find out how much sleep students at their school get each night. Each group was given a certain grade to interview. The following chart displays the results of the survey. So they gathered it by grades. They went and asked a bunch of 7th graders, how much sleep did you get? They went and asked a bunch of 8th graders, and they went and asked a bunch of 9th graders. The categories up here give you headings for the columns. So this shows you the grade level, 7th grade, 8th grade, 9th grade. This shows you what portion of that grade got fewer than 8 hours of sleep. That means less than 8 hours. That could be 7.5 hours, 5 hours, 4 hours. Who got less than 8 hours? That could be 0 hours of sleep. That's not healthy. Don't do that. This is the group of exactly 8 hours because that's generally accepted the healthy amount of sleep for people to get. I will tell you this though, at your age actually, because your brain is still developing so much, did you know that adolescents' brains are developing as much as toddlers' brains? Obviously, you're not developing the same knowledge, the same material, but you are developing as much. So technically, adolescents, 12, 13, 14, 15-year-olds, should get as much sleep as toddlers do. Think about that. Are you getting as much sleep as a toddler? Maybe, maybe not. But more sleep is really a healthy thing for 12 and 13-year-olds. Okay, so this is the amount of students that we're getting exactly 8 hours, and this is the amount that we're getting more than 8 hours. And then it goes across the rows and shows you for 7th grade, what portion of the students were at fewer than 8, 8, or more than 8. For 8th grade, fewer than 8, 8, or more than 8. And for 9th grade, fewer than 8, 8, or more than 8. So using this data up here, this information up here, you are going to use the chart to answer the questions. And then this word justify all of your answers by showing your thinking means when it asks you a question here and it says which grade level has the highest ratio of students getting fewer than 8 hours of sleep, your answer is one of these grade levels, either 7th, 8th, or 9th grade, but you're certainly going to write a lot more than that. And that's what I'm looking for when you guys submit these pictures of your notes. I'm looking for your mathematical thinking. And if you don't write it down, I can't see it because I can't see inside your brain. So I want you to come up with an answer and decide which grade level has the highest ratio of students getting fewer than 8 hours of sleep, but then also write down anything you do for how you decided that. How did you pick a grade level? What did you do? You could draw pictures, use numbers, tell me in words, but show me your reasoning for how did you pick a grade level. So that's number 1, which grade level has the highest ratio of students getting fewer than 8 hours of sleep. You're also going to do question 2, which grade level has the highest ratio of students getting more than 8 hours of sleep. And you're also going to do question 3. What is the difference? What is the difference? Well, that's a word we worked with a lot last week. What is the difference between the ratio of 7th graders getting 8 hours of sleep and the ratio of 9th graders getting 8 hours of sleep? Don't worry yet about question number 4. When you pause the video, you're just trying questions 1, 2, and 3 in whatever way makes sense to you. And then come back when you're done. So pause me right now. Okay, hopefully you have some answers here, and we're going to go through and find out if you were correct and how you decided. So I don't want you at this point to erase or change things and try to make it match mine exactly, because I really like when you guys upload pictures of your tasks. I like to be able to see what did you try? What did you try before I just showed you what to do? Now, if you have some stuff written down and you realize that it's wrong, again, don't erase it. Maybe just put an X through it so I can see this is what you tried before and here's what you realized was correct as you went through. Or if your answer is correct and I just show you a different way that you also think is cool, don't X anything you out. Don't X out anything you did, but add to it on the side or something if you see something else that you're like, oh, that was neat, I didn't think of that, and I'm gonna write that down. So when I ask you a question like this, which grade level has the highest ratio or lowest or whatever, what I'm asking you to do is compare, right? And the question becomes, so this was all about fewer than 8 hours of sleep, so I'm really just looking in this column. And the question becomes, how do I compare these numbers? How do I deal with that? Well, the fact is it's pretty tricky when they're all written in different forms. Let's add a little note to ourselves over here. Underneath the panda, I'm going to just draw a couple lines like this, and I'm going to tell myself, and I'm going to make this line come over here too. I'm going to tell myself that this entire table, just in case we're still not quite clear on this definition, we're going to become much more clear on it through this standard this week. This table is all examples of rational numbers. By the time we're done with this week, we're going to hopefully have a very solid definition in our brains of what this really means. But rational numbers, because you worked with them the last couple weeks, and maybe as you worked through, you were like, I think I kind of get what rational numbers are, but we're going to make sure by the end of this week that you really 100% get what rational numbers are. So some examples in this table, I can see that 7th grade did all of their values as fractions. And I can see that 8th grade did all of their values as decimals, and specifically those are terminating decimals because they stop. And I can see 9th grade, oh, this is something we haven't worked much with yet this year, but we certainly will. 9th grade did all of theirs as percents. Now, the fact is these are all different forms, but they're different forms of the same group. They all belong in this group of rational numbers. And the reason they all belong in that group together is because they can all be changed into each other. That's what the deal is with rational numbers. So if I'm trying to compare something like this, I need to make them all the same. And I'm going to show you a couple of examples, and you can choose. You can say, I want to make them all fractions, or I want to make them all decimals, or I want to make them all percents. So to compare things, it really makes more sense if we get these, instead of having 3 different forms of rational numbers, let's get them all to the same form of rational number. And I'm going to show you all 3 of them, okay? So fractions, 3/10. Just a reminder, this goes to the hundredths place. You start learning a lot about those decimal place values all the way back in 5th grade. So this is the hundredths place. So this would be 38 out of 100. And guess what? The word percent, I know you've heard this word before and worked with them. We'll work with them a lot more this year, but the word percent literally means out of 100. Per out of cent 100, like century is 100 years. So I can actually put that out of 100. Now still, actually, I'm not quite good to compare. I've got this one out of 100 and this one out of 100, so I should probably do this. Are you ready? Times the top and the bottom by 10 and make that out of 100 as well. Now I made them all fractions that I can compare. And this was 7th grade, 8th grade, 9th grade. Now, what if you're like, I'm not 100% sure on how you did all of that. That was kind of a lot to remember, and I don't know if I love that method. This is what's so great about rational numbers, is that if fractions aren't your favorite, there's other forms. That's okay. What if I do decimals instead? Well, let's think place value again. You did a lot of expanded forms in 5th grade, if you remember back then. And you would say, okay, this is tenths, which means I could write that as a decimal that is also tenths. Okay, I could do 0.3. This one was already a decimal. So this was 7th grade. This was 8th grade. And percent means out of 100. So if that's what it is as a fraction, then it also goes to the hundredths place as a decimal. So if you're like, fractions aren't my favorite, That's okay. Rational numbers can also be written as decimals. It's the exact same number. It's just a different form. Now again, to compare these, some people find it helpful to make all of them go, just like we made all of them go to the same denominator, we make all of these go to the same place value. So 0.30, 0.38, 0.36, there's another way you can make them all the same form, just decimals instead. And now that I have those, this will actually be pretty easy for me too, to go like this. Okay, now I made these all hundredths place, which actually means one more thing I could do is make them all percents. Percent means out of 100. So if I'm going to change these decimals to percents, all I have to do is times them by 100. Okay, so rational numbers are so awesome because we have options. We don't have to work with fractions if we don't want to. We could change them to decimals or we could change them to percents. And why do we have all these different forms? Well, it depends on what you're doing. Sometimes fractions make the most sense to deal with. Sometimes decimals are a little easier to work with. And percents, we use percents in our society a lot because we always know they mean out of 100. So percents are a very common way out in the regular world that people make comparisons, and we all feel like even if you're talking grades or something, if somebody says like, yeah, you have 112 points out of 152 points for science class or whatever, your first question is usually what percent is that? Because our brains just process percents because it puts it all out of 100. So whether or not you're looking at the green here in fractions, the pink here in decimals, or the orange here in percents, the question was, which grade level has the highest ratio of students getting fewer than 8 hours of sleep? No matter which one you look at, 7th grade was the smallest ratio. 30 out of 100, 0.30, 30%. No matter which type you use, that's why you have options. They all represent the same thing, even though they kind of look different. No matter which one I look at, which grade level had the highest ratio? Oh, I was looking at lowest. 7th grade was the lowest. 8th grade was the highest, 38 hundredths, 38 hundredths, 38%. 8th grade had the highest ratio of students getting fewer than 8 hours of sleep. So it seems like 8th graders in this group need to get a little more sleep. Okay, which one do you have to work with? There is no have to, really. You should be proficient in how they all work, and we are going to work with all of them. But again, that's the nice thing about this is you have options. So if you don't love working with fractions, we're going to learn a lot over the next couple of days about how to change them into decimals. Now, some you might have memorized. So let's look at question number 2. Which grade level has the highest ratio of students getting more than 8 hours of sleep? Okay, more than 8 hours of sleep is now in this column. More than 8 hours. 9/20. Can I change that? What if I don't know how to change that? I'm going to show you all of them again. You ready? 9/20. Okay. What if I times everything by 5? Why would I do that? Well, let me show you. 9 times 5 is 45. And 20 times 5 is 100. I just put it out of 100. So 0.4 is 4/10. Right now that's in the tenths place. As a refresher, that's the same as 40/100ths. And percent, we know, always goes out of 100. Okay, so again, this was 7th grade, this is 8th grade, this is 9th grade. Okay. Now you could easily make those decimals. That means 7th grade, I'm just going to write the decimal under it. 7th grade is 0.45. 8th grade is 0.40. Oh, you guys should probably be able to see that. And 9th grade is 0.43. This also makes it really easy for me to now change them into percents. 45%, 40%, 43%. Now you're starting to get a feel as I show you all of them. Are you starting to get a feel for which one's your favorite? I like percents, or I like decimals, or I like fractions. okay? And that's fine. And sometimes we get a favorite and then we realize, oh, on this problem, I actually like fractions better. That's why it's really good to have an idea of all of them, because it really depends on what you're doing. So this question asked, which grade level has the highest ratio of students getting more than 8 hours of sleep? Highest ratio? 7th graders, 0.45, 45 hundredths, 45 hundredths, 45%. 7th graders have the highest ratio. So it seems like 7th graders get more sleep. 8th graders seem to get less sleep, and 7th graders get more sleep. All right, this next question, here's what I did. Difference is talking about subtracting. Okay, so now we're not necessarily, we are still kind of comparing, but in a little different way, not just which one's bigger or smaller, but finding the difference. So what is the difference between the ratio of, so I went through and found these in the table. 7th graders getting 8 hours of sleep, I found that was 1/4. And 9th graders getting 8 hours of sleep, I found was 21%. This is another scenario where having them in different forms is really tricky and confusing. This will be easier to figure out if I make them the same form. So if you don't want to deal with a fraction, maybe let's change it to a percent. This one's already a percent, so I'm going to leave it be. This might be one that you already have memorized. If not, we're going to work on that the next couple of days. But do you know already that 1/4 is always a quarter, 0.25? And therefore, if it's 0.25, it's also 25%. Does that all sound familiar to you? So 1/4 is 0.25, which is 25%. So now when they say, what is the difference? Now I can just subtract these 2%. I can do 25% minus 21%, and there is a 4% difference. 7th graders are, there 4% more 7th graders are getting 8 hours of sleep than the 9th graders. Okay, you guys haven't tried number 4 yet, so let's look through this and let's do it together. Number 4 says, if there are 200 7th graders at Riverview, how many of those 7th graders get? And then it takes me through these. Well, the first thing I want from my table, and I'm going to come up and pull it from the table, less than 8 hours, I am only in the 7th grade row. So I'm looking across the 7th grade row. 7th graders at Riverview, 3/10 of them get less than 8 hours of sleep. 1/4 of them get 8 hours of sleep. And 9/20 of them get more than 8 hours of sleep. If I want to know what portion of them, so this is a ratio, this is not total students, this is what part of the total students get that much sleep. So all I have to do with these values is now multiply them by my total. Okay, and you can use a calculator for that, or I mean, sometimes people, if they're like, I forget what fraction button to use or whatever, here's the other great thing. You could change all of these. Instead of 3/10 as a fraction, you could just do 0.3 times 200. You can change that to whatever form is easier for you to work with. We just reviewed that 1/4 is the same as 0.25, so I could do 0.25 times 200. And 9/20, we wrote that up there. 9/20 was 0.45. And if you're still not sure about that conversion and how that worked, that's what we're going to work on a lot tomorrow. So don't worry, after tomorrow, you will start to learn how to turn any fraction into a decimal. We'll make sure we're very good at that. And then at this point, you could just grab a calculator and multiply them, or do the math by hand, whatever makes more sense to you. But this, 3 times 200, remember how you move decimals? 3 times 200 would be 600, so we move it once and it's 60. Or you can type it in, 0.3 times 200, 60. So 60 7th graders get less than 8 hours of sleep. 0.25 times 200. 50 7th graders get 8 hours of sleep. And last one, 90 7th graders get more than 8 hours of sleep. So if you gathered your data correctly, if we apply it to our group of 7th graders at Riverview, if these ratios are accurate, then we could assume there's about 60 7th graders who get less than 8 hours of sleep, 50 seventh graders that get exactly 8 hours of sleep and 90 seventh graders that get more than 8 hours of sleep. And guess what should happen if I add these numbers together? I should get 200 if I did all that math right. So you can test that out and see if you do. So over the next couple of days, we are going to learn a lot about different forms of rational numbers and converting between those forms. How do I change a fraction to a decimal? How do I change a decimal to a percent? And all the other ways around. So try your math practice for today and then come back tomorrow ready for some more conversions.